Hello, welcome back to my channel. I think I only have 3 gigabytes in my phone, so I don't have much storage. So let's see how this video is going to turn out. I was planning to talk about 2 books, but we'll see. Anyway, let's just jump right to the first book I want to talk about. That would be The Stones Cry Out by Hikaru Okuizumi, translated from the Japanese to English by James Westerhoven. Now, I just kind of want to sort of include like a tiny bit of introduction, right? So the last book that I read before this was The Barefoot Woman by Scholastique Mukasonga, translated by Stump. And that book was a non-fiction. It was fantastic, and I must say, well, that book touches upon war and also armed conflict, particularly, specifically talking about the war in Rwanda. And I noticed that the subsequent 2 books that I read, including The Stones Cry Out and also the other book that I hope I can talk about in this video later, also touches on the topic of war and also human violence in general. And I thought there's this really interesting continuation in my reading experience. It's like I just picked up, or I would say I just finished like 3 books randomly. And basically all these 3 books that I've been reading, they all kind of like touch on this topic, and I thought, okay, this is really interesting. Like we're seeing some kind of thread going on. So anyway, kind of like the second installment of this thread would be The Stones Cry Out, which was also a fantastic book. So this book is a novel, and it won a prize in 1994, the Akutagawa Prize. I didn't know anything about this book before that. I just saw it at the library, and I saw that it was thin, and I was like looking for thin books, and I was like, okay, let's just try this. And oh my gosh, it blew my mind. So this book is about this man named Manase, Tsuyoshi Manase. So Manase, he used to be a soldier, a Japanese soldier in World War II, and he was stationed somewhere in the Philippines. And by the time we were introduced to Manase as a soldier, it was already like towards the end of World War II, and Manase and his and the other Japanese soldiers, they're kind of like walled up in this cave somewhere in the Filipino jungle, and the condition was like really horrible for everyone out there. Some more horrible than others. We're talking about like extreme starvation, really dehumanizing and degrading conditions. And so in that situation, Manase encountered this this lance corporal who was dying, like literally dying. Like we're talking about his eyes, maggots in his eyes. He was like super emaciated, but he was talking. He kept on talking, and he and Manase, well, basically mostly him, he talked about stones and rocks, specifically the beauty of stones and rocks, to Manase as he was dying. And this was something that really stuck on Manase's memory, that upon his entrance or re-entrance into civilian life after the war, Manase ended up becoming an amateur geologist, and he becomes low-key obsessed with collecting rocks, studying rocks, just appreciating the beauty of rocks, and pretty much just kind of like wrap himself up in this obsession of his. Eventually he has a family, and and he has kids, but something horrible would happen to his family, and this horrible thing, it's sort of inextricably tied up to his obsession with rock collecting, and also in a way indirectly to his horrible experience as a soldier during World War II. And I thought that the way that this book kind of discusses how those things really connect with each other feel very very tight. Like, I really enjoy how this novel just kind of explores the intersection between war in general, human violence, by extension, human violence, and tying to that the idea of masculinity, which is also really interesting. It is this part becomes more and more explored towards the end of this book, but yeah, there's definitely like an intersection between these two ideas. The idea of being passive, but at the same time, the idea of cruelty as well. And all of these things, which are really human things, being set against a backdrop of the natural world, represented by stones and rocks. I just thought that overall this book was really stylish. And also, this book is also the kind of book that I like. Like, there is this one kind of narrative that I particularly have a weakness towards. It is a narrative that goes something like this. So you have like a bunch of human characters at the foreground, right? And the human characters, they do their human stuff, human drama, right? And then another important aspect of this narrative is some kind of inanimate object or element of nature, and this element of nature, or this inanimate object, or this non-human entity, sort of act like a silent witness to whatever is going on with the humans. And I feel like in this novel, the stones, the rocks, geological formations, they sort of represent this aspect of the book. And I like this kind of narrative. I don't know, probably sometimes it kind of makes me feel this sense of catharsis. Like, this kind of narratives, they usually highlight just how puny people are. And occasionally that kind of makes me feel a little bit vindicated. But anyway, yeah, I do feel some kind of satisfaction reading this kind of stories, because those humans, they usually have their own like struggles, and their struggles are usually related to like conflict between individuals, right? But then you have these silent witnesses just kind of like looking at the humans and be like, okay, what the hell they're doing? So yeah, this is I would say this novel certainly kind of like something that I would group under that kind of story. Another example that I read last year that I would consider to be like this kind of narrative was a book by Ivo Andrić that I really, really, really loved. It was called The Bridge Over the Drina. I really loved that book, and it was something like this kind of narrative as well. Like, the story happened like across. The story spans over a few centuries, I think, and then it centers around the bridge that was built over the Drina, and basically the novel just kind of like talks about what goes on with the civilization, with the people, the society that lives around this bridge, and how very often, like, as time passes by, they keep on doing really silly human things, like fight and kill each other. So yeah. Maybe if someday I'll probably make some kind of a list videos, a list video talking about, like, books that have this kind of narrative, which I really enjoy. Anyway, yeah, that's I guess that's it for The Stones Cry Out. I hope I have I have enough space for the second book, because I think for the second book I have much to say. Basically, it's going to be like a rant, because I did not like this book. So this book was Without Blood by Alessandro Baricco. This book was originally written in Italian, translated to English by Goldstein. I read Silk by this author a few years ago, and I did not like it. That book had that book had tons of tons of things that I didn't like. Chiefly being that it was, the male gaze in that book was so intense, like super intense. Well, at least according to my standard. And also something that I would call like Western gaze, because apparently one of the important characters is a Japanese woman, and that Japanese woman doesn't seem to be like really active, but she's also central to that short novel, almost fable-like kind of a novel, which also another thing that I wasn't particularly crazy about. But what sort of offended me the most as a reader was that it just had that really, really, really strong male-centric and Western-centric perspective, which I thought was just Without Blood did not have that whole Western Asian or Western Eastern kind of a thing going on, but this book was also had that very strong male gaze component in it, which I thought kind of ruined the reading experience for me. So basically what happens in this book is that we follow a woman who was the survivor of a particular violence that happened to her home when she was little. So basically what happens is that this woman, her name is Nina, when she was a little girl, her brother and her father was killed in some kind of a violence. But the nature of that violence, or rather the nature of that conflict, wasn't really described in detail. Like the book doesn't really tell you like what kind of war it is, because it doesn't even tell you in which country this happened in. It is vaguely European, but it doesn't tell you about like which war, which conflict. It does seem to be like some kind of a sectarian violence or something like that, but again, it's not very clear. But the father of this woman, apparently he used to kind of hinted to have done something during a war that causes some parties to retaliate. And upon this retaliation, the father was killed, and also the brother, who was also a little boy at the time, was also killed. And Nina, the little girl, was the survivor. And she eventually, time skipped, she became an older woman in kind of like the second half of this book, or rather the latter 2/3 of the book. And she would eventually meet one of the men who participated in the killing of of her father, named, this man is named Tito, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was the name. So yeah, and without revealing too much, this book is it has something to do with like violence, the cycle of revenge, and possibly also how can one respond to that cycle of revenge, whether to continue it or to stop it. Just like Silk, this book was also really short. It had this kind of like fable-like quality. We don't really know in which country it is set in. We don't really know what kind of war it is. So because of those, the lack of those details, there is something that feels kind of like, flexible and plastic about this story, in the sense that you can sort of like, ideally readers can relate to the story or identify with the story regardless of where they come from, their background. This part, I suppose it was okay. Like I'm not really crazy about this whole fable-like thing, kind of narrative, but it's still fine. But what I don't really like about this book is that female characters in this book, there aren't many of them. Nina being like the most important character because she's like the main character. The other characters are mostly male characters. There's one other side character who is not very important in the story, who's a woman also. But the problem is that the few women characters in this book, Nina including, are very much written with this specific idea of women in mind, and that is women being the representative of purity and beauty. When Nina was written as a little girl in this book, one male character, which was this Tito character, he sort of viewed Nina as like this embodiment of purity. And he was also the reason why Nina sort of survived the violence that happened to her home. And it was kind of like partly because of this idea that Nina exuded some kind of purity as a little girl. And then as a woman in this book, she's presented as someone who is attractive, physically attractive, and also sexually attractive. And how this book concludes, like the resolution in this book, is also related to the womanness and also the attractiveness of Nina, which, to be honest, just felt really cliched and boring to me. I really didn't like that part. The other side character, who's like really minor character, who happens to be a woman, she is also described in terms of her beauty as a focal point, and I found that to be kind of pointless. And relates to this idea that the female characters being represented as this embodiment of beauty. Another side to that coin is that because they're like beautiful and dainty, they are also kind of like portrayed as people who are ignorant towards war and violence. And I would say that there is some discussion that can be made regarding this aspect in this book. I would say that one can argue that this is probably the point of view of the male characters and how they see Nina in this book, particularly when Nina encounters Tito later in life. And basically Tito's position is that, well, Nina is a woman, and so therefore she can't possibly understand why war has to happen, and why men have to engage in war even after war has finished, and why they have to like continue doing it, take action regarding to war, continue the violence and stuff like that. And basically Tito posits that because they are women, Nina can't possibly understand. And I suppose one can sort of see that kind of assign this as the character's point of view, probably not the book. But I would say, as I continue reading the book all the way until the end, it feels like even the book itself would probably agree a little bit with Tito's position. There is something that feels a little bit condescending about about women in general in this book, that I just felt to be I thought it was kind of uncomfortable to read. There was something that felt blatantly misogynistic about this book that I thought was just okay. They kind of make me question a little bit, like, where is this book coming from? Anyway, this book was not a great reading experience for me. I did kind of appreciate a little bit about like when Nina and Tito meets each other, and Tito talks about like what he thinks about war and why men have to do war and why they have to continue the war even after like the conclusion. I feel like that aspect of the book kind of fits into this whole continuation of my reading experience, but related to the topic of war, very loosely related to that topic, a loose thread, if you will. So I thought that there is this kind of like continuity going on, and I thought that was neat. But as for the book itself, I did not like it. I thought that I thought of giving Baricco another chance by reading this book, and turns out, it was another dud. Anyway, I think that was a really long rant. So I'm gonna stop this video now. As you may have noticed, my voice is different because I have a bit of a cold again. I think a couple of weeks ago I sort of withdrew from booktubing because I had some kind of cold. And but this time I decided, okay, even with my changed voice, I'm not sure how changed it is, probably because I only experience the change because it is my own voice, so I'm just kind of like hearing it with my own ears attached to my own head, so it could sound the same to you guys. Anyway, I decided this time, even with the cold, I just kind of want to record something because, I just kind of want to share my reading experience regarding these two books. So, in future videos, I'll be talking about more books that I finished. I think I finished 3 at least, and one of those books were quite interesting. I would say all of them have been kind of interesting, but one I've not really updated my Goodreads and like my rating on that book, but it's probably like 4 or 5 stars. But anyway, I'll talk about that book later. So for now, thank you for listening, and let me know if you've read these 2 books. Let me know what you're reading right now. And I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for listening. Again, thanks. Bye.